All right, we're back, and it is COMP1004 Rapid Application Development here at Georgian, Fall 2016 semester, Week 8, Part 2. Whew. And what I want to do is I want to connect to this thing now, right? And I think one of the things we want to kind of do is access our context, right? We want to connect or create a way of connecting to our database, right? So this is what we want to do. So somehow we need to connect to the database using entity framework somehow, right? That's what we have to do here with get students. And one of the ways to do that, of course, is to make a reference to the context, right? So an example would be if I call this the college context. So now that I've included this using statement up here, which is my models, I should be able to use my college context to do what I need to do. Let's see if that works. So I'll say something like college context. You should be able to see that now, college context, right? I'm going to call this the database, or DB, right? It's going to represent the DB, my college context. It's the whole database, not just one table, right, in the database, right? And I'm going to call this, I'm going to make a new object of college context. That's number one. So first, I make a connection. This is the connection to the database, right? Now what I want to do is I'm going to use, I don't know if we've talked about this before. So far we've been using explicit, data types for the most part. But you can also use, like just as a review, the var keyword, right? Did we cover this? Yes or no? Did I cover the var keyword with you guys? Yeah. So just to review, var keyword, var, it's not dynamic. It's not like JavaScript where it's dynamic, right? I'm using the var keyword because I don't know what the type is, right? And I want C# to tell me what it's going to be, right? So what I want to do here is I want to do something like this. I want to call this the students list, right? Or the student list. Maybe we'll call it the student list. And it's going to be equal to, and this is where the funky stuff comes in, from, I'll talk about where I got all the stuff in a second. From student, right? In db.students, right? I want to select the student. Oh. It's very similar to that. In fact, it's called link. So I'm going to use link. We'll talk about link another day, not today. For now, I just want you to see how it works, and then we'll talk about what it is. So use link to access student table in the DB. That's what this is doing. So now I have this object here that I've defined with the var statement, right? And if I hover over it, you can see that it says it's of type IQueryable, right? Student, right? Which is, and I've called this a student list. Well, IQueryable is an interface. And remember, do you guys do interfaces in Java? I'm hoping, right? I'm pulling at strings. Sometimes the professor will cover it with you. Sometimes they won't do it too much. Think about the interface as a contract that tells users like me that I'm using their library, what I need to include, right? So the IQueryable type is saying that, and it's usually relating to a list. It's a list, right? If you want to kind of pare it down, a list of type student. So the way I could also write this instead of using the var keyword is list of type student, right? It's the same. Now look, I'm getting an issue, right? Once I start doing a list of type student, which is really what I want to do, I got this error. Well, why? Because if I go back, let me undo that for a second. The reason why it didn't give me that right now is it gives me one item in the list, right? And what I may want to do is convert this to a list. For example, to list, right? Once I've converted it to list, now if I hover over this, the var keyword tells me it's a list of students, right? So we'll just do that. So we'll say, don't worry about, again, all the syntax and that. I don't expect you to remember this right now. List of type student. We can also replace that var keyword, just to be explicit now. Now we're being explicit. With the var keyword, we're being implicit. We're implicitly asking C# to say, hey, can you please figure out what type this is for me? Sometimes it's so long or the type is so complex that we use var. It's easier for us, right? It doesn't mean that once you define this student list, I can redefine it somewhere else like you can with JavaScript, right? It's not dynamic typing in this case. It's implicit typing. It's using type inference to figure out what it is, as opposed to explicit typing, telling it exactly what it is. This is explicit typing. This, which is equivalent right now, is implicit typing. And either one or the other is fine, whatever you feel comfortable using. If you're someone who's more of a C++ or old school programmer, you will not like this way. Because when you see var, you're like, oh my God, it's JavaScript, right? It's not JavaScript, okay? It's still C#. We're using the var keyword just to say that this is a variable. We don't know what type it is, but whatever we assign to it when we use the assignment operator will tell us what type it is. And it'll always be that type from here on in. Okay. So now we have a list of students. Well, now that I have a list, guys, I mean, you know, I can assign this list to my data grid view, right? Because my data grid view is going to take a list, right, and display it, a list of data, and display it in a table format. That's what it's going to do. So once I've got this, then theoretically I should be able to do something like this. So it's called students data grid view, right? Dot data source, which is, if I can spell properly, is equal to my student list, right? I should be able to do that. This is like telling my students grid view here inside of my of this form, right? That, hey, so I'm going to put this in some comments here so you can see. So display the student list in the data grid view. That's what it's going to do. Okay, so let's see if this works. This little thing that we got. And if we don't work, we'll figure it out. Let's just run this thing and see if it's functional. Now, for those people who have problems connecting with the database and blah blah blah, it's not going to solve the issue here, right? All right, yay! Look at that. Nice and easy. Okay, we're good. Questions? Now you guys know everything about database, right? Here's something that we can do. Remember that because we've actually said that you can do modification, and let's see if this works exactly like it should. First of all, notice that the table is truncated. It's not showing everything. I get a scroll bar, right? That's one thing. And of course, if you look at this is one problem with this way of doing things. If I don't know how big this thing is, I'd have to make it pretty big. And it's not dynamic. It's not like going to respond to how big this is going to be, right, by default. It's not going to look at it and go, I need this many columns. It's not going to tell me that right away, right? So this is one of the issues that I have. And if I start this thing again, I'm just going to show you this, right? So here it is. I want to modify Tom to, Tom Smith, right? So let's just change this up for here and press enter and move on. Does this persist is the question, right? Just asking, right? Because this is the thing we have to think about. So I close this down, right? And then I open it up again. So I run it again. Does it persist? And no, it does not. Why? Because I haven't told it to. That's the thing. I haven't done any kind of work on the back end to say, hey, when something changes, do an event and update the database. I have to be explicit here, right? I'm not just dragging and dropping stuff. I'm sure I'm dragging and dropping this item here for sure, right? That's what I'm doing. But I'm not. When I'm converting this thing over, when I'm reading this, I'm reading the database. That's all I'm doing. I'm just reading the database. In my SQL statement here in the back with using link, right? If I look at my SQL statement, is there anywhere in here that tells me to write to the database? No. So it won't do it. Yes. No, it's not closed. Taking its time to close. That's why, right? Like it'll close, but just can take it. So steps to connect to the database for this one, right? One, when you have to have a database, We have to use Entity Framework. It's the best and easiest way to connect to the database. Doesn't matter if you're using web or Windows Forms, right? Why? Because it creates the beautiful model for you, right? You don't have nothing to do. That's a great thing. Remember, rapid application development, right? So first, database, then connect to it with Entity, or create a connection with Entity Framework, create the model here. Refer to the model inside. This is a step we have to do. We have to, in order for us to access the models, right? In order to access, right, the context, the DB context, right, we have to include, we need to include, right, or, the models folder, well, in our script, right, which is what we've done here with using statement. Otherwise, I can't. If I take this using statement away, I'm not going to have access to this piece here, this college context DB is equal to new college context. I won't have that. Make sense? Here's something else. If I have this, right, do I have to have it here? Because that means every time I connect to a database, I have to do this again, right? Remember, it's only being done when I want to get students. If I always want it to be done, maybe what I want to do is launch this somewhere else. Like, for example, when instead of my form loads, when my form is activated somewhere, right? Or it would have to be somewhere up here where when I create my form in the first place, I create my connection, right? Otherwise, it's only going to be happening every time I update my students, or get students. So this is the only thing this does is it just connects and reads, right? Okay, we're going to do all this again. And we're going to do it again in another form. And we're not going to use this method of connecting. We're going to try and drag and drop. I'm just saying. Let's see if that's possible, all right? We're not going to mess this form up, though. So we're going to save this form, right? And we're going to use the same project with the same connection string. We already have the connection string. We don't have to recreate that, right? And let's see what happens. So let's try it the traditional way. So again, I'm going to make a new form, right? I'm going to go right-click. I'm going to go Add New Form, right? Which is New Windows Form down here in your quick hits, or you can go New Item and then go to Windows Form, right? Whatever it is, like this, New Item, and then Windows Form. And then we'll call this. It'll still be the students list, but it'll be like we'll call this list form 2, right? Just so we know that it's another one. Give you another example. There it is. So we got another form, and we have no connection to the database here. I have all my connections and everything else, but this time, what I want to do when I put on my toolbox, let's try something different. We'll try it a bunch of times so we can see if there's a difference, and we'll kick off list form 2 as opposed to the other one first. We'll change that in the program class. All right, so I want to do the same thing. I want to kind of drag and drop my data grid view, right? And I'll make this really big. I'll kind of make it like this big again. Except this time, what I want to do is this little smart arrow right here. I'm going to click it, and I want to select my data source this time. So I'm going to kind of go here and go Add Project Data Source. This is something different. Okay. All right, and it says, well, what kind of data source do I have? Is it a database? Is it a service? Is it an object? Is it SharePoint? That's pretty old. Which one do I want? This one, database, right? Next. Okay, it's a data set. Next. Cool. Which one is it? It's not this one, right? Let's see if I can pull it down here. Is it this one? Yeah. Right? Yours would look like this, because I remember it from mine's COMP1004. I already have the connection. Why am I going to need create a new one, right? And it gives you the connection string right here just to check to see if it's true, right? I'm going to click Next. And it's going to say, hey, do you want to save the connection string in the application config file? Yes, we do. But we definitely don't want to call it COMP1004 connection string, right? Let's call it something else. Let's call it, so we're making a new connection string just for this data set, all right? So we're going to call it college context data set, right? So we know what it is. Connection, make it really long, right? So we know what the hell it is. It's just for this other form that we're making. Next. All right, cool. And can we see the tables? Yes, we can. And here's my table, my students table. In fact, we can see all the tables and all the fields. That's different. Let's click on students. And it says COMP1004 dataset. Leave that alone. Dataset's fine. And click finish. All right, now this is something totally different. What this does, it's still using Entity Framework. Like we're still connecting to the sorry, let's go back. It's not using Entity Framework. It's still using the connection string to connect to the database. But this is the old way of connecting using ADO.NET. All right? So ADO.NET is another form of connection, right, that we can use to connect to the database. This is the old school way, and this is the way we were first taught, right, because we didn't have Entity Framework back then. Okay, notice that it says, here's my COMP1004 dataset, my student binding source, blah, blah. And I want to start with this one, this list form 2, right? As opposed to the other one we made, which was student list form, right? So again, to modify that, I go into my program.cs file. And inside my program.cs file, I don't start with student list form. I start with list form 2. So let's change that. Same thing. I'm just starting off one form instead of another. Let's see what the difference is. If I press start, still going to kick off my form. I'm still going to get this thing. And notice that I still get the same old style. Still can't get it all. Now, what about if I modify stuff? Can I go in here and go Smith and press enter and go to the next one? And does it persist? It's a different thing. It's a different way of connecting to the database now, right? So let's see what happens, right? So close this down, and then I open it up again. Sure it does, and no, right? I'm just putting it out there so you can see that there's, same thing, right? Close faster because the database connection is different. So why this way? Well, one thing to note is it does some stuff in the background for you, okay? So just to show you what this is. So I want to kind of have the data source, right? And notice that I have my program description and everything else. I know how big this is going to be, so I want to kind of include, notice my program description is kind of being cut off here, which means this probably needs more room, like something like this. I can't monkey with the fields so far, the way it looks, right? So I'll show you this in a second, though. So let's just open it up a little bit more. And again, you'd have to adjust your screen a little bit. Also, just to make, because it's making me crazy, in the properties, please change the window or the startup location for the window. Let's change this to, the center of the screen. That is just nuts, driving me nuts, right? Start position. So I always have to pull it to the center anyway. Okay, there we go. And if I press play again, you can see that because I can see this, right? That's the one advantage I have in this form. I can see the data grid view. It's going to be able to generate it, so I can kind of pull it off. And I think I even need more room than this, right? So even bigger, right? And I'm just showing you, like, that what you need to do here. It's kind of similar, but I mean, it's kind of like trial by fire. And why? Because it gives you this extra column in here as well, which we can turn off. Okay, so let's try that and see if that's better. Not bad, but I can't enter anything in here. Even if I say, as an example, that I can, like if I go back to this and I click on this little arrow and I say enable editing, right? Well, I've done that, but it doesn't work, right? I can also do preview data as long as I have a connection string, right, or a data set, if you will. I can do a preview right here, so I can see if I connect to the database. Again, I just want to specify that this does not, and I'll say it with a capital, does not, capital D, does not use Entity Framework, all right? However, what it does do on the back end, if I actually looked at the code behind file that's attached to this form, right? So I want to see the code behind this form itself. So if I go to list and press F7, view the code, here's what it does do. It does this. This .students table adapter .fill, it fills the data with this data set, right? It takes the student data set, the students table from the data set, and fills the adapter. That's what it does. So I just went over here to the list form 2, right click, and press F7 or view code, right? It'll do that. Okay, so just the way they created it for you, right? Because it's the way that Visual Studio saw the table, and it's created that way. It's kind of done it inverted. Instead of capital C, which is what I did, it did the other way around. You could always change this up. Like if I want to change this up, how do I do that? I go to list form, and notice that this thing here is right here, this COMP1004 data set. It's actually an object here. And if I go into properties, right, you can see that it has the data set name, right, as well as this. And notice that these can't be the same, right? So that's why I did this. Okay. Now, if I want to make this, capital as an example, I could rename this. But if you notice, if you try, because it'll have the same name, it'll clash because they're both objects, right? Okay. So again, some things to note here. One thing is it says generate member true, right? Some other things that it gives you. Case sensitive is false, right? So it's not case sensitive. I can certainly make it case sensitive if I want. Let's not do that, right? Here's another thing I have. I have a student binding source. The student binding source tells me what the data source is. Here's the data set, right? And then what the student binding source is called. Here's the student binding source name, right? And we also have the student table adapter. So we have these three pieces, these components, if you will, that get added into this table when I connect to the database. For assignment number 4, right? I'm just telling you, which is the next assignment, right? You'll be having to connect to a database just this way, right? The drag and drop way. However, I will give you a bonus if you make it so that it is using Entity Framework. We'll talk about that. So what about the best of both worlds? Can I do both? Can I use the table adapter to give me a little bit of form? Yes. Yeah, and that's the way you can do it. So I want to use the table adapter, right, to get my table data, right? But I want to use my data source as my entity framework, right? I can do both, right? So how does that work? I'll use list form 2 to do that, right? So again, if I go here, I do have a data source that says student binding data source, right? And if I delete this, if I kind of say none, right, then it wipes this out. That's what it does. So that's not good. I want to see the tables. That's what I did it for, right? Notice that I have other data sources as well, right? If I click on other data sources and I go to my project data sources and I kind of look down here, I have a data set now that's part of the student binding data source that I created. Same thing. I'm going to leave this alone for now. The good thing about using a data source, a student binding data source, is you can drag and drop. You can still use any kind of data table, and I can drag and drop other kinds of controls as well. For example, a list view, right? A list control, or some kind of text box. I want a text box to show me one field, right? And I want to modify that one, details, as an example, as opposed to everything. But how do I combine these things? I do the same thing, right? So I kind of go back into the list view, and again, this is review, right? We just did this. Well, first we need to use that using statement, right? So using COMP1004 models, right? And then down here, I need to make a connection to the database. This is created already. So this line of code loads data into the database. Yay, okay, I want that, right? And it does that on load, right? So I'll leave that in there, but this is the actual stuff that gets auto-generated. And then what I want to do after it loads it in, I want to change the data source altogether. I want to say something like, again, var, first of all, let's make a connection to the database. So I'll say college context, same thing, remember we did this before, is equal to a new college context, which gives me the connection to the database. And then what I want to do after I connect to the database, connect to DB using EF, right? Entity framework. I'll spell it just for you. We'll go over the entity framework another day. Okay. And then from here, we want to access the data again, like we did before. So we're going to use var, We'll say student list is equal to from, students in db.students. We want to select, all the students. That's like select star. And we're going to convert this to list, all at one. And what we want to say down here is we want to use that data source, which is our data source. We're going to say, now we didn't call this anything. That's the problem. And before we go into that, because we didn't call this anything, we didn't name this data grid view, we just called data grid view 1. Let's make this the student data grid view again. Students, or student list data grid view. Okay. And going back to this piece, I can do that. I can say student list data grid view dot source, data source is equal to student list. Same thing we did last time. Okay, so we got the best of both worlds. We got able to see the students, and now we're loading it in with our data, right? Now, you might say, whoa, we're connecting to the database twice. Yeah, we are. That's a bad thing, right? But I'm just putting it out there that if you want to combine, let's see what happens. Remember, this is rapid application development, right? I would say that as a thing. So still read the data, no problem, right? One of the good things about this is now that we have that capability, right? And if I go back to my list form here, I can go to the table and I can edit my columns, right? Notice that I have student ID, first name, last name, program, and blah. What if I don't want to show my student ID, right? I mean, I get it, but I don't want it. I can just remove, right? So I don't want to have my student ID in there anymore, okay? And notice also that I can kind of, modify the properties of each of my fields as well, of my form, right? Because I can do that right here. So here's my first name, and instead of it saying first name, right, I want it to display first space name as opposed to first name, right? Because that doesn't make any sense. It shouldn't be, the header text shouldn't be first name. It should be first name, right? Let me cancel that and I'll go back. Here's my student ID to show you again. The other option is if you don't want to remove an item like student ID because you want to have access to it, you can also make the visibility false. So now it's just not going to print. It's not going to show it anymore. And my first name, let's go back and do that again. So my first name on the top, it's going to say, I want to display first name. My last name is going to display last name. My program, as an example, we'll say program description with a space, right? Those are all important things. And if I was to expand this thing, so you can see there's other properties you can go into as well, right? So data property name is the data property that's related to the database in the table. That's what it has to be called. This can't change, right? Fill weight, right, is 1. Frozen is false. Minimum width is 5. The width of the cell, you can actually make this the same width. Because right now, the width of this one is 100. Each of them is 100, right? But maybe I need more width for one over the other one, right? I can do that too. I can specify how much width I want from a layout perspective, right? For each of these items. Let's say okay though for a second and go on. I can also add additional columns if I want columns that are not linked to the database, right? Let's see what I get. Okay, that's different, right? Program space description, and then first name, last name, program, but now this is all on top of this, on top of each other. Why is that? Well, one thing is, look, my student ID is gone, right, which is what I wanted. Got all this extra space here, which I didn't want, and I wanted this to be longer. So maybe I need, I don't know, 150. Try this out. So go back. I love that lag, love it. And go back to here, edit columns, go to program description, which probably needs more than 100. And let's choose, instead of the 150, let's say something like that. And press OK. Notice again that I can't go in here and and modify things directly. I can't do that, right? When I click this, I actually have the whole data grid view that I'm modifying over here, right? And I can decide things like, how do I want this thing to look? Like the whole data grid view. What's the background going to look like? I can also look at the columns collection this way by clicking on the ellipses. It'll pull up the columns collection this way too, right? It also specifies data source if I want to specify it here, right? Inside my properties, right? Students binding source, right? And the default cell style, which is the data grid view cell style. And if you look, it tells you how what the back color is going to be for the cell style itself. So each of the cells is going to be, the background color is going to be white. What the font is going to be, Microsoft Sans Serif 7.8. If I want to make this larger, I'll mess it up right now. But you can go into it and do and change these funky things here. Okay, I'm just putting it up there. I mean, and it gives you a preview down here of what it looks like, right? So you can see what it looks like from a selection, what it looks like when it's selected, and so on. The padding in the cell. So if you want to add in some padding, you can do that as well. Like example, let's say I want, I don't know, a couple of points of padding all around. So I can kind of do 2, which kind of adds padding all around the cell. I can do that. And then again, if I don't like my font, if I want to go with a different kind of font, like I don't know, I like using Lucida Sans. You might use something else. You can go in there and change that as well. And I don't know, maybe instead of 8, I want to go to something like 14. Right, so that changes the way the cells look, right? And I'm going to press OK. Now you can see that that changed already, right? And if I run this thing now, it's going to look a lot different, right? Notice that it's not wide enough anymore, right? Let's try that again. Because I've made the cells different. It's not going to display a preview here, unfortunately. It is what it is. If I preview the data, it just gives me the data, but it doesn't edit anything. So if I go back to edit columns, right? Now here's something. It says resizable is equal to true for my student ID and so on. These are all true. Sort mode is automatic, right? And like I said, the auto size mode is not set. I can always go by column header or by all cells, displayed cells. You can do that too. So whatever my displayed cells are, it's going to just auto size everything so that each header is going to be whatever the size of the cells are that are displayed. This is dangerous only because it may mess with your layout if you have especially we don't want to do it for program description. Absolutely not, because program description might be really long. So that was something that we want to wrap, right? So leave that alone. But for these ones, we're pretty confident that these are going to be okay. Student ID, I'm not even displaying, so I don't care. And then let's press OK. And let's start. So you can see how we got some control, right? It's a little better. Still ugly. I don't like the text is not exactly, and the header text is different than everything else, right? How do I change that? Well, it's down here. So if you look at the actual grid view itself, right? There's the grid color, that's the background. And if you want to control it so that you don't see anything like that, you can change this instead of control dark. You can change that to white, right? Lots and lots of stuff that you can control. And again, the number of things that you can configure is huge. Allow user to delete row, true, right? Allow user to order columns, false. These are all things that I can change, right? This is actually the property of the actual grid view. Causes validation, if I want to use some kind of validation, right? Auto sizes, the column headers, height size. Here's all the other details here that I have, just like normal. Here's something, edit mode, and it says edit on keystroke or F2, right? That's the other one that it allows me to do. Edit on enter, right? That's when I enter the actual object, it starts editing, right? So maybe I want edit on enter instead of double clicking like I did before, right? The grid color that we talked about already. Margin, we can also add in other things in here. Make it read-only if you really want to, so you don't want to touch anything, and so on. Any questions about this control? I'm going into detail because one of your assignments, assignment number 4, is going to have all this data grid view stuff, and you're going to need to modify it to make it work, right? Data grid views are the most common controls we use when we display data, right? If I list data in a table, I use a data grid view all the time. And actually, you'll find that on the website, when we go ASP.NET web, when we use web forms instead of Windows forms, we use the grid view. It's called grid view instead of data grid view. We do the same thing, kind of list everything in a grid view. Is everyone good with what we're doing right now? Is there anyone stuck or can't do it? Gabriel, you're good? Awesome, right? Okay, I know it's not the most exciting stuff to connect to the database, but we need to do it, right? Now, over the next couple of weeks, we're going to be talking about how to write to the database, how to delete from the database manually. All the steps that we're going to be doing is manual steps, right? Right now, all we're doing is reading from the database, right? It's a good step, believe it or not, right? Because we have to create the database and we have to do all that stuff. I'm going to do another example, right, after this one, before we end this part, right? Because we're sitting at 6 o'clock right now, where I create the database as a file. That's another option, right? And I want to talk about that option as well. The good thing about creating it as a file is if you share it up on GitHub and you share the file, you actually include the file inside your application, I can get it. This way, I have no access to your local DB, right? So how would I get your database? It'd be impossible. I wouldn't get your database. If you're doing it up on Azure with SQL Server, right? Like a proper SQL Server on Azure, no problem. It would just, your connection string would point to Azure instead of local, right? That's the difference. Okay, one more thing. So let's go back in here and click on this thing before we stop. And if I go to Edit Columns, and if I click on First Name, and you can see that this is, you can also alphabetize alphabetical instead of just appearance or whatever, right? So if I go alphabetical, it'll just put everything in alpha format. Header text, if you want to find something read-only, resizable, tooltip, and so on, right? You can modify all this stuff. Column type, the context menu strip, if you have a context menu strip that comes up. Trying to think of anything else that you need to know in terms of the way this works. How about if I double click on this? Does it do anything to double click or anything like that? Any one of these things do anything? Not really, not in this case. Okay, so none of it does anything here in terms of what of this stuff. Default cell style. We talked about the cell style up here. The data grid view cell style is right here. And if you notice this is the row default cell style. But the default cell style here, right, is for each of the columns. So if I click on this and click default cell style, it will pull up this stuff, right? Which is how does it look, what the back color is, the fore color, other issues. For example, padding. If I want to add padding in here again, and I want to add in the same kind of padding as I did everywhere else, so 2 all the way around, so it wraps everything. That's good. My alignment. If I want to align things left or right or center, I could do that. So I could kind of say, how do I want to align, right? So I want to kind of do middle center for the alignment of the cell, right? I could specify that alignment. This is for the header text is what I'm talking about here. From a formatting perspective, my behavior, right? I can also format the type of cell just like we do in Excel, where I can format what it looks like. Is it numeric? Is it date time? You know, this kind of stuff, I can do that as well. And by the way, it works the same thing for the actual row itself. The font, which is what I want to try and modify, I can modify that to Lucida Sans again. So if I go Lucida Sans, notice that it is 14. Press OK. And I can also specify if it's bolded, right? Now this is the cell style, right? And it gives me an example of what it looks like here. So if I go into click on bold, if I go like, I don't know, instead of regular, I go demi-bold, right? And if I click OK, and I press OK, and I press OK, doesn't change this, right? But if I press this, you'll see now that everything is bolded for my first name, right? So it's almost like what I've done over here. I just did it inside the magic view there. All right, questions around data grid view. I know it's not the most exciting thing ever, all right? Believe me. I'm choking because of how exciting this is, all right? But it's required, right? So now you have to think about, if I want to get access to the data in my data grid view, I'm reading the data. How do I get access to the data that I'm reading, right? Like, for example, if I click on a cell in the data grid view, how do I know which cell I've clicked on? Okay. So this is where we kind of go in here and double click like we did before. So if I double click on the actual item, you're going to see it says the cell content click. I've clicked on a cell somehow, right? Okay. Now, how do I know which cell I've clicked on? Well, remember that whenever we do any kind of event handler, we have the E, which is represents the event, and the sender, which represents what I've clicked on, what control I'm using, right? So if I do E dot, and I can look at my row index, I can also look at my column index. So I get both. I have access to both row index and column index. So depending on which of the row indices I'm clicking on, I know which row it's going to be, right? And if my row that I'm clicking on, if it's numbered the right way, I can use that row index to tell me what I'm selecting on. So let's, for example, if I say, every time I click on a row, I want to somehow select everything in the row. And I'm just making this up, right? So I say, well, depending on whatever I'm clicking on, that row index is the selected row, right? So I can say something like this. I can say var, so I don't know what it's going to be. If I say selected row, right, or row clicked, that's really what it is. Clicked is equal to the e.row index, right? And if I look at the type, as you've probably figured out, it's going to be an integer, right? Because it gives you an integer, returns an integer. And if I was to kind of display that by using debug.writeLine, we've done this lots of times, and I go and put in the row clicked. What's the row click that I got in there, right? Remember, if you don't have this, means that you need to use control dot to get to add in using system diagnostics. We've done this before too, where now we have that class to do this thing. And if I press on play now, or debug, now if I click on something, again, I'm just going to kind of pull over here so you can see over here, right? If I click on, actually it's inside here. Hold on a second. Because I want to make sure that you see it. That's ADO.net. Sorry, my screen is quite small because I'm trying to project here. But if I click on this, right, as an example, it's not going to appear here, is it? Go back and try that again. You can't see it, but we have to be able to detect what it's showing, right? So, I mean, it doesn't make any sense for me to click on something like this, and then it's not showing me anything here. You can see that the clicks are happening. These are all the events, the click events, right? Let me see if I can rip this off. There we go. Sorry, just for you guys. Oh, it's not what I wanted, but fine, right? And you can see that every time I do something on the actual what I'm doing, it tells me everything I'm doing. I'm reading. I'm using the select statement to select from my table. That's what it's doing, right? So every time I read the database, it tells me how long it takes, right? And then the output is right here, the output window. Here's my locals window, and I wonder if it's on my output window, which is this one. There we go. So now if you look through here, I can see 1 and 0, right? And if I go over here and I click on this one, I can see now that's 1. This one would be index 0, and this one would be index number 2. Right? So those are all the row indices. Yes? Sorry? This is an error? Or this is an error? Okay. So see what we did here? Nothing that's unusual or whatever. All I've done is I've gone in and grabbed whatever row is clicked, and now I know which one it is. If I know which row is clicked, right, I can look at the ID, the student ID that's related to that row, right? And then I can use that to kind of generate another view. I can actually open up another page. I can go to the details view, and I can display the data in this other details view. Okay. One more thing from a reading perspective before we move on to our special, which I'm going to call it enrichment piece. We're going to do a little bit of Unity today, right? Before we move on to the Unity hour, all right? Let's talk about going back to my Solution Explorer, okay? And I have this data. I want to make another form, okay? And this time when I make another form, I want to make it so that I can read individual fields, right? From one particular row, as opposed to every row. I'm making it a list, right? I only want to access one, right? The first one. I don't want to make it a list anymore, okay? So how would I do this? And then we'll talk about combining this. So first, let's open up a new form. So add new Windows form, and we're going to call this student details. Here's my student details. And my student details is going to just kind of show me one student, okay? So in here, for me to generate this, right, I'm not going to use my data sources. I could, but notice that something interesting too. In list form 2, I have this row down here with all my components, right? Now these data sources are part of my project anyway, but they're listed here as part of list form 2, okay? But if I look at my student data, my student list form, I don't have those, nor do I have them from my student details, right? They're still part of my project though, okay? It's just pointing that out. For my program, I want to start off with instead of list form 2, we'll look at student details now, so we can see what that looks like first, okay? And we'll go to student details, and we're going to pull in some other objects here. So I'm going to go into my toolbox. And into my toolbox, I'm going to drag and drop some stuff from my common controls. For example, maybe a label and maybe some kind of text box. And we're going to just format these in a second. So here's my text box. So my label control is going to be like first name, last name, that kind of thing. I'm not going to talk about student ID yet for a reason, but I could. So here's my what it's going to be called. So this is going to be my first name label. First name label, and this will be my first name text box. First name text box. Okay. And what I want to do is I want to format both of these two things. I'm going to click both of them, and I'm going to go to font now, and I'm going to change the font to Lucida Sans. And again, I click both of them. I kind of shift click both these things so I can highlight both at the same time. I'm going to go to Lucida Sans just to keep up that style. We'll make it 14, just for those two controls. Again, we're going to go into label, and we're going to go to the bottom here where it says text, and we're going to change the text of the label to first name. This is pretty simple, right? And we're going to expand the first name text box to kind of be the same size, maybe a little longer, because first names can be quite long now, right? Sometimes they're hyphenated, sometimes even first names. We'll make it, maybe the size of maybe it's first name like this big. Okay, we'll do the same thing since we have last names might be the same size or hyphenated or whatever. So let's copy this and we'll paste it. So we'll go shift click, copy, and then click away and paste. And we'll just change these items. So the label will be last name label. And this will be last name down here. So we'll just get those two things for now, okay? Otherwise, we don't have any room for anything else. And this will be the last name text box. Okay. An image, right? Okay. Killing me, right? Well, for your assignment, yeah. Okay, I'll see what I can do. Okay, so it wants me to fix this problem. Let's see if I can go. So what I got these two pieces of data. I don't care about the other ones right now. And I just want to bring this up so we can display that one student, the first student first. And how do I do that? I'll leave space for the avatar, okay? Or the picture, the image that we're going to have. We'll make an image of the avatar. Okay, so first name, last name. It's wonderful. And what I want to do here is I want to bind each of these ones here. Now, there's a couple ways to do this. One is I can use data binding again, right? I can create data-bound controls, right? Now, there's different ways of doing that. Notice that I can create a binding source for these controls. Right now, the binding source, my data bindings, there isn't a source for this one, right? So I can't. There's no, nothing in here that says I want to data bind my controls. I can do that here with binding, right? And choose my other data sources and do it the old way by going down here and going to students and then pulling down the type of table that I want. So for example, my first name text box, if I click on the binding control, right? I can go in here and do this kind of thing and select under my students my first name text box, this one. And then make this one students binding source, that first name text box. If I click OK here, it's going to bind this to my first name, my first name. And I'll take the first one. But that's not really what I want, especially for this. What I want to do is, and I'm going to kind of, when this form loads, right, for now, here's what my story is going to be. When the form loads, I want to display one piece of student data, the first one record. Okay, let's try this out. So how do I do that? Same way we did before. Again, I'm just repeating myself because it's a good way for you guys to learn too. So it's going to be here, and it's going to be using COMP1004.models. We need to do this because we won't have access to the model anymore. And we're going to do this on load. So we're going to have to get that student details. Oops, there it is. Double click on this. So when the form loads, then what I want to do is I want to display that data. So I want to do the same thing that we did before. I want to say college context db is equal to new. So we're repeating ourselves a little bit. And again, if you think about this, if I was going to do this in the real world, like we talked about making a character class. Remember we made the character class, which is separate from all these things? The right way to do it was to create some kind of database adapter, a custom database adapter that already does all the connection stuff for me. So I don't have to do this stuff all the time. And all I do is access the database adapter method that opens up the database for me when I need to. So it doesn't do it every single time I click or something like that. That's crazy, right? We'll get there, one thing at a time. Okay, one step. First we walk and then we run, right? Actually, that's more like flying. Okay, so college context, and then from there we're going to do the same thing. We're going to say var my student this time with a capital S, right? And not a student list. It's only one student. Is it going to be equal to, again, in brackets from student lowercase in db.students, select by student. This time, instead of selecting anything, I want to say one first or default is what I want to say. First or default. The first one I get or default. I can also return one. For now, I'm going to use first or default. First or default means get the first student, whatever it is, right? For now, it's just for testing. I don't care. Later on, what I want to pass in is the exact student. So it might be something like this: from student in DB students, where student is equal to student ID, select student. That's what the full thing would be, right? So I'm selecting whatever student that I've passed over to this form, right? But I'm not doing that. I'm going in chunks here. I'm just trying to show you how we can display the student data. Okay, so good. So now I have this student is not a list anymore. If you notice, it's a student. See the difference? My var statement is what makes this different, right? I don't have to think about what it is. Is it a student list? Is it an IQueryable? What is this thing? This thing is now an object of type student, right? Student is defined, just for those people who are lost, inside my models folder. Here's my student class right here, right? So this is a representation of my student class, an object of my student class, which means I have access to first name and last name and all that kind of stuff. So if that's true, then I can do something like this. I can say my first name text box text is equal to student dot first name, right? And I can say my last name text box.text is equal to student dot last name. And you can see how easy that is, how beautiful that is to be able to do that. And this is using Entity Framework. So I can read from the database. I can look at the specific column or sorry, the field in the database or the row that I want to look at. In this particular case, I'm getting the first row. That's what first row default is. And then that first row of data, I'm going to display the first two pieces, the student first name and student last name, inside of my first name text box and last name text box. Okay, let's see if that works. So run. And if everything goes well, then we'll have this. Hey. Questions around this stuff? I know we've done lots of exciting stuff today, and I apologize in advance for how exciting this is, right? But we need to get through this piece because without knowing how to read from the database or accessing stuff with Entity Framework, the next weeks that we're going to work on this stuff, the next few weeks, right? Because everything is going to be database from now on, was going to be like over some people's heads. And I don't want that to happen. That's why I'm going slow today, believe it or not. I know, Gabriel, you're going to say you're not going slow, but I'm going slow, believe it or not. Okay? Because Gabriel says I'm too fast. Right? Am I too fast? See? Questions before we move on, and we stop this piece. And we'll take a short break, and then we'll get into our enrichment piece. Anybody? I know you guys are dying to do Unity. All right, let's pause this one. We'll get back to this. I'm going to expand on this next week, and I'm going to give you assignment number 4. Okay, I won't do it this week. I want you guys to work on your assignment number 3. Get that all out by next week on Friday. Now we got lots of time, so no extensions, please. And then hopefully I'll have all your marks by next week as well. Okay, let's stop this thing, and when we get back, oh, one thing I should probably do is put this up on GitHub, because I know people are going to say, Tom, you didn't put us up on GitHub. I can't do it because you did something different than I did. So we're going to go to get started, and yeah, we'll put this under Georgian College, lesson 8, publish. And this is only going to be the beginning part, which means I got to go to changes, and these are all the changes. I'll say update a project, commit all, and go home, and then click sync and push, which should push everything up there for you guys so you guys can have that. All right, so let's stop this, take a short break, and when we come back, we'll do Unity.